Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and thank you kindly for stopping by. I do appreciate it. I'd like to thank Bob Collymore for a fine evening last night, and I said to him I must show you my new Samsung K Zoom camera phone, and it's rather good. I said to him, on a selfie, which is of course a reverse photograph, it works at a 21 pixel level, which is quite extraordinary. And it was great catching up with His Excellency Johan Borgstad and Bharat Thakra of Scan Group. Bharat was describing monthly meetings with Martin Sorrell. Very interesting insights he provided. I'd like to also thank, and if you haven't seen the interview I did with Charles Island of East African Breweries, giving a great perspective on the economy, what's happening, and then specific to EABL as well. Yesterday I got into a Twitter conversation about the Tsavo, and on that note I'm going to put up some photographs. One I took from the Lugard Falls at sunset on Christmas Day last year. The Lugard Falls were named after Frederick Lugard and is actually a series of white water rapids on the Galana River. I'll put up another photograph of wild white flowers that were on the side of the road as we drove on our game drive, and it was extremely beautiful. And finally, one of the elephants crossing the Galana River on Christmas Day, and just below where we were staying. It was really quite fantastic because they crossed over, and then late in the evening they came back again. Political reflections amid the continued tensions. Ukraine's currency plunged as much as 6.9% to a record low of 13.715. The head of the central bank, Valeria Gontareva, told lawmakers in Kiev the hryvnia dropped after a mood of panic spread because of speculation about the start of a full-scale war. And I think Putin's responses have been highly calibrated and quite sophisticated. This aid convoy, of course, a classic example. But nevertheless, I think it remains a very volatile space, eastern Ukraine, and I think a key geopolitical risk. Joseph Willits tweeted unconfirmed reports that Iran could offer Maliki asylum. I'll put up a photograph of him. And then Johan last night told me to watch a video which I've linked on the website. It's called The End of Sykes-Picot Breaking the Border. And I watched it this morning, and it's extraordinary. It's a little bit surreal as well, just as Johan said it would be. In the piece which I was writing about the US-Africa Summit, but I made a couple of other observations over the weekend. One of them was about the new now that we exist in, where so much content is upstreamed in real time and distributed, curated, and amplified before mainstream media can filter. And I think that's a really key issue, in particular managing the narrative, and it's a game changer in many respects. I said it's revolutionary. The crowd is now the narrator, and it's happening in real time. Essentially, the news is being set ground up, whereas once it was being set from the top down. And then I made another point, which is about photographs and images, and a quote by Roland Barthes: "One of the marks of the world is perhaps this reversal. We live according to a generalized image repertoire." Merrill, who represents Hillary Clinton, said that Hillary Clinton looks forward to hugging it out with the president. She made these comments to Jeffrey Goldberg in The Atlantic, causing discomfort in the White House. Clinton and the president are scheduled to appear together tonight at Martha's Vineyard at a birthday party for Ann Dibble Jordan, wife of Vernon Jordan, the former president of the National Urban League, and a confidant of both Obama and President Clinton. Tension has been building between the Obama and Clinton camps since August the 10th, when the Atlantic writer Jeffrey Goldberg published an interview with the former Secretary of State, in which he said great nations need organizing principles and don't do stupid stuff. And she said don't do stupid stuff is not an organizing principle. I'll put up a photograph of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. Currency markets, the euro is at 133.66. It touched 133.36 on Tuesday, coming within a whisker of a 9-month low of 133.33 set last week. Dollar index continues to tick higher. The momentum has slowed a little bit, but I think it is going to grind higher. 81.53 last, Japanese yen 102.30 last, Swissy 0.9078. The pound back above 168 at 168.06, holding a 2-day advance. Bank of England's quarterly inflation report is expected today. Aussie 0.9279, climbed for a second day after Westpac and the Melbourne Institute said their index of consumer sentiment for August rose 3.8% to 98.5, the highest since April. India rupee 61.24, South Korean won 10.2765, the Rial 227.79, Egyptian pound a smidgen below 7.15 at 7.1490, and the Rand 10.6369. The euro has lost 0.3% in the past month, according to Bloomberg. The dollar has gained 1.7% and the yen has climbed 0.6%. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index and then a 3-month chart of the euro dollar. The European Union Statistics Office will probably say growth in the euro area economy weakened to 0.1% in the second quarter from 0.2% in the first. But concerns will continue to swirl around the consumer price index release, where expectations are for a 0.4% annualized increase, which will be the slowest in more than 4 years. Japan's economy shrank an annualized 6.8% in the second quarter. That's its biggest contraction since the 2011 earthquake, and that's because of a sales tax. Annualized contraction in GDP, however, was slightly less than median market forecast for a 7.1% drop. Gold ticking a little bit higher, 1309.42. I still think we fall away to 1250, but with Ukraine, ISIS is an intervention in Iraq. You can see why the path of least resistance has been higher. Crude oil, $97.16. Cora International LLC paid $25.6 million for an uncut 29.62 carat stone in February. It has now yielded an internally flawless 7-carat polished stone. This one is coming in at 12 carats. Blue Moon is big but no heavyweight in the world of luxury stones, but it's turning heads for its clarity cut and kaleidoscopic hues of blue. And then the lady says, you can't describe that blue. And I love this quote. You just drown in it. Sub-Saharan Africa, population boom. 40% of all humans will be African by the end of the century. A seismic shift in demographic trends is transforming the world into an increasingly African place, creating huge economic opportunities, as well as new risks for political instability and extreme poverty, a United Nations agency says. The future of humanity is increasingly African, says a report by the UN Children's Agency. Africa accounted for only 9% of the world's population in 1950, but by the end of this century, about 40% of all humans and nearly half of all children will be African. Whilst every other continent is seeing a slower rise in births or even a decline, UNICEF projects that 1.8 billion babies will be born in Africa over the next 35 years, and the total African population will nearly quadruple to about 4.2 billion by the end of the century. Until recently, the UN had predicted that 1/3 of the world's children would be living in Africa by mid-century, yet that prediction is now believed to be an underestimate. Instead, 37% of the world's children will be African by 2050, and more than 40% of births will take place in Africa. Population explosion will be biggest in West Africa, especially in Nigeria. By 2050, Nigeria alone will account for an astounding 1/10 of all births in the world, the report says, and its total population will reach nearly 1 billion by the end of the century. UNICEF says that African life expectancy will reach 65 years in the next 2 decades. In the 1950s, it was less than 40. As part of these trends, Africa will become increasingly urbanized and crowded. In 1950, its population density was just 8 persons per square kilometer. By mid-century, Africa will hold 80 people per square kilometer. Its megacities will soar in size, with the population of Lagos nearly doubling to 24 million by 2030, and Kinshasa going from 12 million to 20 million in the same period. Researchers say the outbreak probably began, this is the Ebola virus, in December with a 2-year-old child in Guinea, and the disease has raced through Guinea, Liberia and Sierra Leone, and recently entered Nigeria, which has recorded 2 Ebola-related deaths as of August the 9th. Via The Independent, I learned that Ebola claimed its first European victim as a Spanish priest, whose photograph I will put up, dies of the disease in Madrid. The South African all-share shaved off 0.14% yesterday, but remains 11.2266% higher this year. Dollar Rand was last at 10.6372. I'll put up a 6-month chart. Egyptian pound, a whisker below 7.15 at 7.1490. Egyptian stock market bounced 0.4% to another fresh multi-year high, and it's rallied an enormous 36.744% this year. Ken Roth, who's from Human Rights Watch, has tweeted, "Putin let me in Moscow to issue a report on the Andijan massacre, but Sisi didn't let me into Cairo for Rabba massacre report," and he's posted a photograph. I'll put up the link for mass killings by security forces, Egypt Human Rights Watch video. I'll also put up a link. Sisi was visiting Bhutan, and Russia says they're going to boost wheat supplies to Egypt and is mulling a free trade zone. The Nigerian all-share bounced 0.19%. It's up 1.8461% this year. Then I saw this comment from a Nigerian epidemiologist, I can't pronounce that correctly in the time we have, Chikwe, who runs a website called Nigeria Health Watch. And he said Lagos is big, it's crowded, it would make in many ways a perfect environment for the virus to spread. And again, Johan said to me, these numbers, they don't really sound right. He was highly skeptical and reckoned that, the numbers were much higher. In the heart of Lagos, people live on top of each other, sharing bedrooms and toilets. In densely populated communities, infection control becomes almost impossible to do well. The Ghana Stock Exchange retreated 0.38%. It's up 5.314% this year. 2 activists from Swaziland said Tuesday they are worried about their safety after the Swazi Prime Minister reportedly said that they should be strangled for travelling to Washington during a recent summit of African leaders. "We have the intention to go home," Gomeza said. "There is no guarantee that we will be safe." The Prime Minister told lawmakers last week that union leaders had gone to Washington without announcing their plans. The Times of Swaziland reported, "They leave your constituencies and do not even inform you where they are going. Once they come back and you find out what they are from your constituency, you must strangle them," he said. Anadarko is harbouring some even grander plans, this is according to the Wall Street Journal. Over the next few decades, it envisions building as many as 14 refrigerated plants in Mozambique. Such a scale could rival the world's biggest hub for exporting liquefied gas in Qatar. And I wrote about this when I was there recently, and I said, Mozambique could be the next Qatar. On that note, I'll put up a photograph of evening in Maputo 74 days ago. Lisbon, we learned the healthy bank being carved out of Portugal's heavily indebted Banco Espírito Santo will assume BES's €3 billion credit line to a troubled Angolan subsidiary, but take provisions for losing the entire amount, the Bank of Portugal said on Thursday. Bank of Portugal said Novo Banco would take on the interbank loans granted to BES's troubled Angolan subsidiary, but that the credit line had been fully provisioned. The total provisioning for these credits is only a measure of caution and does not reflect in any way a lack of expectations of recovering the loans, the Bank of Portugal added in a statement. Taking on the loans while providing for 100% losses on them means that any money recouped from BES Angola will count as profit for Novo Banco. Cooperative Bank Kenya reported first half profit before tax accelerated 15.062%. Loans and advances to customers were up 32.689%. First half profit before tax up 15.062%, but first half profit after tax was up only 0.266%. What has happened here is there's been an increase in the effective tax rate, more than 1,050 basis points year on year to 30.2%. That informs us why you see this huge difference between the profit before tax and the profit after tax. They had a reduced corporate tax rate because of a 5-year period that is given to companies that list at the stock exchange. On balance, on a trailing P of 8.756, looks inexpensive to me. I wrote that piece about how I thought that the Barack Obama Africa Summit has reset Kenya's and US's relationship. I did an interview with Mahmoud Jan Mohammed, who's a friend and the MD of Serena Hotels, and if you get a chance, have a look at it, because a lot of insights into tourism in Kenya and further afield, East Africa, of course. He's the managing director of Serena in Afghanistan as well. Showed me, you know, the SMSs that went back and forth after one of the attacks there recently, and it really was wonderful to catch up with him. Very much an eminence grise of the tourism business. I'll put up a link for Serena. I think the share price is at a very egregious price. We know it's a challenging landscape in Kenya. That's how they characterized it in their half earnings year release. But I thought the results were better than could be expected in those circumstances. 26 million Kenyan mobile subscribers sent $12.7 billion in 6 months. That's mobile money. Kenya shilling just below 88. Nairobi all share up 12.989% in 2014. Little bit of a correction since last Wednesday, but we're going higher again. NSE 20 above 5,000 for 5 sessions since last Wednesday, now at 5,023. Barclays Bank is turning to its parent for a 4 billion shilling loan. They reported first half profit after tax accelerated 13.424%. That was reported yesterday. Jeremy Awori made some interesting comments about the banking industry, saying it's currently undergoing unprecedented disruption resultant from a highly dynamic market environment. We have therefore amplified our innovations agenda, and we have additionally set up an investment banking arm. They're now talking about starting a mortgage finance division. Capital Markets Authority has approved NIC Bank's plan to raise 8 billion shillings through a corporate bond. The details of NIC Bank are linked on Rich Wrap-Ups. Yesterday, the Nairobi all-share eased by the least allowable fraction and retreated 0.01 of a point to close at 154.40. It's corrected 1.4489% since setting an all-time high on Wednesday last week. The correction has been supremely shallow, which is a very bullish signal, and I expect fresh all-time highs in short order. As I told you, the NSE 20 has closed above 5,000 for 5 sessions. Previously did that on the 29th of January. BAT closed at an all-time high. I believe the equity market is underpinned by a domestic rate structure that is headed lower. $2 billion of Eurobonds, $1.4 billion net, because they had to repay $600 million. An imminent samurai bond, a bond issued in yen, and a sukuk bond have inverted the domestic bond market. and monies will have to find a new home on sharply reduced government of Kenya bond issuance, and I think that's a very bullish indicator for the stock market. Once again, thank you for stopping by.